Hey, hello friends, and welcome to this new Flutter video. In this, we're going to be taking a look at creating this nice scrolling effect in Flutter ListView. So we're going to be learning a lot on this because we're going to be using provider and ways to detect the scroll, and this is going to be a really nice effect. Basically, this is the effect that like when you open a drawer and the files, they shift in perspective. So it's kind of that effect. I wasn't able to find a good name for this, so I'm just going to call it the drawer file effect. So okay, so let's get started. Okay, so right now we're in a simple Flutter app, and this we're getting the data from the JSON placeholder API. We're getting a list of photos, and from that photo data we're parsing the JSON. We're creating objects of this photo data class. That is just a simple photo class here, and we're creating a list of these photos, and we're displaying them in a simple list view. And talking about this custom list tile, this is just a simple stateless widget that I've created. This includes a list tile that is wrapped in a container, which is displaying a bit of shadow and have a bit of padding. So this will look like this on an emulator. So we have a simple list view. So we're going to be adding that scrolling effect that I showed you in the demonstration. So okay, so for achieving that effect, the first thing that we need to do is we need to detect when the scroll happens. So in Flutter architecture, there is one thing that all the scrollable widgets, such as a list view and all the other scrollable things, they have the capacity to tell their parent widget when the scroll starts and when the scroll stops. So basically they provide with a notification such as the scroll start notification, scroll end notification, and scroll update notification. So basically this list view, when you start scrolling on the list view, it's gonna provide its parent with the information that the scrolling has started. So basically we need a way to detect that event. So for that, what we need to do is we need to wrap this list view, ListView.Builder in this case, with a notification listener. So we could listen to those notifications. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to wrap this with a widget that is going to be notification listener. Notification listener. And notification listener is going to have a type that is called scroll notification. So this notification listener is going to listen to the type of scroll notifications that are given to it by the child widget, that is the ListView.Builder. So the notification listener then has a property that is called onNotification. So the onNotification receives a function, and this function expects the data regarding that notification. So I'm just going to pass a notification data here. And in here, it expects a boolean to be passed, so a boolean to be returned. So I'm just going to return true in this case because we don't really want anything to do with booleans here. So I'm just going to pass in true. And the next thing that we need to do is we need to check when the scroll starts and when the scroll stops. So for that, I'm just going to do some simple if-else statement. I'm checking the type of this notification. So if this notification is of type scroll start notification, we're going to do something. And if it's of type notification is of type scroll end notification, then we're going to do something else. So let me just use a simple debug statement for now. I'm just going to do debug print and just print here scroll started, and I'm going to copy this, go down here and type in scroll ended, and just run the code again, and it's loading again, and I'm going to go to the run statements, open up the emulator, and when I scroll, you can see that the scroll started, and when the scroll stopped, it presented with the scroll ended. So right now we're able to detect the scroll. So the first thing that we wanted to achieve is completely done. The next thing that comes to mind is we need a way in which we could send this message that the scroll has started to each of the list tile item here. So we have a custom list tile, and what we want to do is we want to send this event data to each of the item in the list. In such cases, when you want all the items, all the child items to share some data, a good solution is provider. So I'm gonna use provider in this tutorial, so feel free to check out my other tutorial on provider if you don't know what provider is. But if you know what a provider is, let's get started. So for that, what we want to do is we want to come to this pubspec.yaml file, and I do have this provider package imported. So when you type this one here, make sure you click on the packages upgrade, and when you click on this, the Flutter is going to import that package into your project. So let me just close this pubspec.yaml file. So what we want to do now is we want to create a simple class that could hold the data regarding this scroll. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to go to the lib folder. I'm going to create a new jar file. I'm going to call it ScrollEventNotifier. Basically, we're going to be creating a change notifier that could that could provide with the changes whenever the scroll type changes. So I'm just going to create this simple class, and let me just create a new class of ScrollEventNotifier, and that is using a mix-in that is going to be change notifier. And make sure you use the foundation package here. So in this, what we're going to do is we're going to have a simple boolean, because at this point we only want to detect when the scrolling starts and when the scrolling stops. So we're going to have a simple boolean that is called isScrolling. And this is going to be a private one because we're going to create functions here. So in the ScrollEventNotifier, I'm just going to pass a constructor, notifier. We're going to pass a constructor that requires this dot isScrolling. And also we need to create a getter, isScrolling. And this is going to return the status of isScrolling. And we also need to create a setter, isScrolling. And it's going to take in a boolean, It's going to take a boolean that is scroll status that the listeners will pass, and isScrolling is equal to scroll status. And we're going to notify the listeners. So this is going to be our simple change notifier extended class, that is the ScrollEventNotifier. I'm just going to close it. And what we need to do is we need to wrap our notification listener with a change notifier provider, so that all the list view and all the list tiles do have access to the same change notifier provider. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to wrap this notification listener with a change notifier provider. And in the change notifier provider, I'm going to provide it with a value, and I'm going to use the different constructor here, .value constructor, because we're going to pass the first instance ourselves. So in the value, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass scroll and notification. This is scroll event listener, the class that we created, and I'm going to pass the initial scrolling state of false. So basically, till this point, what we have achieved is that we are able to detect when a list is being scrolled and when the scroll has ended. And we have also created a simple class that is the ScrollEventNotifier that holds the data regarding the scrolling, and that if the scrolling is going on or if the scrolling has ended. We need this class to be created, and we want it to be a change notifier because we're going to be using provider to provide the updated scroll status to all the child elements of the list view. So what we're going to do now is we have added a value to this change notifier provider that is going to be the initial instance of the ScrollEventNotifier class that we just created, and we have passed false as its default value because there will be no scrolling when it first is created. Okay, so the next thing what we need to do is we need to update the ScrollEventNotifier. And to use the provider, we need to have a context, but at this point we don't have any context. We need to wrap this notify listener with a new builder. So I'm just going to wrap it with a new builder, and the builder does require a build function, which is going to give the context. So I'm just going to cut this notification listener from here, and also this child property. And in the builder, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in the context that is given to the builder, and in this I'm just going to return that same notification listener. And now in here what we can do is we can create a new scroll listener that is provided to us by this change notifier provider. So we can call provider.off and pass in the context here. The reason why I pass in a builder here is just to get this context, because there was no other way in notification. And if we could get the notification, we could get the provider here also, but we have to create separate instances for each of this case. So it's a good way to wrap the widget with a new builder and get the provider information there. So we're going to set the provider of type ScrollEventNotifier, ScrollEventNotifier, and it's going to be all right. So now what we want to do is before the debug statement, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the scroll listener. I'm going to set the is scrolling state to true when the scrolling starts, and to false when the scrolling ends. So basically at this point I'm able to set the scroll listener scroll event notifier to its desired state. That is, when the scroll starts, it's set to is scrolling, and when the scroll stops, the is scrolling is set to false. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to pass this information down to these list tiles. So for that, what we can do is in the build function, we can create a new variable that is of type Boolean, and we can name it is scrolling, and take the provider information here from off context and get the scrolling state, and it's going to be of type scroll event listener. Okay, so it was scroll event notifier. I just mistakenly typed that. It's going to be of type scroll event notifier, and it's going to return as a type of is scrolling the data. And basically we're accessing the same state that is set here in the notification listener down here in each of the list item. So is scrolling is set here, and we're getting that value. So based on this value, we can now change the way the list tile looks. So just for demonstration, let us do one thing. I'm just going to change the color of this container based on the scroll state. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to, in the box decoration, I'm just going to check for the value of is scrolling. And if it is scrolling, then I'm going to pass the color of colors dot, let me just give it a color of blue. It's going to be funny. It's going to be blue, and if it's not scrolling, then we're going to give it a color of white. So let me just rerun the app, and basically I think we should also restart the app just in case. So I'm just going to close this app and restart it again. Okay, so as soon as the app starts and the data is loaded, when we scroll on the list, you can see that the color changes to blue, and when the scroll ends, the color changes to white itself. So our listeners are working perfectly. And okay, so the next thing we need to do is we need to change the perspective of the list tiles. Okay, so for adding perspective to our list items, we need to transform each of the list item. So for that, what we're going to do is we're going to wrap the container with a new widget that is going to be of transform. And further, then we're going to be like animating this transform widget. But for now, what we're going to do is in the transform, we require a transform property. So for this, I'm going to pass a matrix of 4, and I'm going to pass a code here that looks like this. So basically we're adding a matrix for identity, and we're setting an entry point and the rotation. So I don't think this is a good place to explain what is going on here, but basically we're adding some transformation to add a perspective to our list item. So at this point, if I run the app, what happens is that each of the list item is tilted, is skewed by some perspective. So what we can also do is I need to add, at this point when I run the app, you have seen that it doesn't look quite nice. The reason for that is basically I have not added an alignment to the transform. We need to align our transform. So for that, I'm going to add alignment dot center. we need to align our transform from the center. And when we run the app, you can see that the effect is looking nice. The only problem is that we want this effect to only take place whenever we're tilting, whenever we are scrolling, basically. So for that, what we need to do is in the rotate, I'm just going to use is scrolling, and if it is scrolling, then I'm going to add that perspective, that rotation X, and if it's not scrolling, I'm going to pass 0.0. Okay, so if I run the app now, you can see that when I scroll the list, the transform is working. When we scroll the list, the transform gives a rotation of minus 0.2 radians, and when I stop the scroll, when the scrolling stops, it gives a rotation of 0.0, that is, there is no rotation. So at this point, the transformation is working, but it is quite stuttery because there is no animation in between. So for that, what we're going to do is we're going to wrap this transform widget with a new Tween Animation Builder. So we're going to wrap this transform with a Tween Animation Builder, and the Tween Animation Builder is going to provide us with a tween property for which we want to pass in the tween, that is the starting and the ending point for which the transform has to occur. So basically the starting and ending point is going to be this minus 0.2 and 0.0. So if the scrolling starts, we're going to move from 0.0 to minus 0.2, and when the scrolling stops, we're going to move from minus 0.2 to 0.0. So let me just create a new tween here. And in the tween, I'm going to add a beginning point that is going to depend upon the scrolling state. So we can check if it is scrolling, then the beginning point is going to be 0.0, and the ending point is going to be minus 0.2. And we also need to pass in the end to this tween. So the ending is going to be the same. We're going to pass in is scrolling, and depending upon the scrolling, the ending is going to be minus 0.2 if the scrolling starts, and if the scrolling ends, it's going to be 0.0. So at this point, we have created a tween. So what we need to do now is we need to add a duration, and for the duration, I'm going to add a duration that is of milliseconds, basically. milliseconds, and that is going to be of 200 milliseconds. That is going to be fine. And also, what we need to do is, in this Tween Animation Builder, we don't really need to pass this transform as a child. We need to cut this transform from here, and we need to pass in the build function, because the Tween Animation Builder is going to build this transform itself using its builder function. Okay, so the builder function is going to give us with 3 arguments here. I don't need the first one. So basically we need the value of the tween that is going to be a double, either 0.0 or 0.2 or any value in between. So the Tween Animation Builder is going to be basically transforming between, providing us the values between 0.0 and minus 0.2. So we're going to get that value here in the double, that is the rotation. And also for the third argument, it's going to give us a child, and we don't need that here. So I'm going to pass in rotate and return and pass in the transform here. And also we need to replace that with a semicolon. And what we need to do now is we need to change this rotation X to this rotation that is given to us by the builder. And when I run the app again, and we can go to the emulator, and when we run the app, you can see that the animation is looking quite nice, but the color is not looking good. I'm just going to remove that. I'm going to only pass colors.white. And when I run the app again, you can see that the scrolling is, when the scrolling starts, the views animate from 0.0 to minus 0.2 rotation. And when when the scrolling stops, they shift from minus 0.2 to 0.0. And that is looking quite cool. So I hope you understand everything that we did in this tutorial. So let me just have a recap. So the first thing that we did was detect the scroll, that is using this notification listener, because the ListView and all the scrolling widgets give their parent widget the notification of the scrolling starts and scrolling end and so on. So basically we're wrapping this ListView.builder in a notification listener that is listening to the scroll notification given to it by the ListView. And depending upon that scroll notification, that is whether the scrolling is started and whether the scrolling is ending, we give that information to a change notifier provider value, that is the ScrollEventNotifier. This ScrollEventNotifier is a simple class that is given that is getting track of this isScrolling state. That is a change notifier. It's an extension of the change notifier because we want to notify all of the child ListView elements regarding the scrolling state. So for initialization, we are keeping the scrolling state to be false. And depending upon the scrolling, we're changing this value of ScrollEventNotifier, that is to true or to false. And we're getting the same value down here in the custom list tile, and depending upon that, we're animating the tile. We're using transform to skew, add a bit of perspective to our list items, and we're using Tween Animation Builder to tween between different rotation points. That is 0.0, 0.0 to minus 0.2, and this is all. So this gives us with a nice scrolling effect. Okay, so I hope you learned much in this tutorial, and I really can't thank you all enough for your tremendous support in the year of 2019, and I do promise you to come with more immersive and great content in coming year 2020. So thank you all for your support in 2019. We have grown to a family of 5,000 subscribers, which is really great. It's an awesome feeling to see your love on the videos and the content that I create. So thank you for watching. See you next time. Peace.